On the surface, South Korea appears to be one of the greatest economic success stories in modern history. In less than half a century, it transformed itself from a country poorer than many African nations into one of the richest economies in the world. This transformation is often contrasted with its northern neighbor, which remains isolated and economically stagnant. In popular narratives, South Korea is portrayed as a model nation that did everything right. But this image hides a far more troubling reality. Beneath the glass towers, global brands, and technological prestige lies a society under extreme pressure. In 2020 alone, more than 500 people died from a phenomenon so severe it has its own name, gurosa, or death by overwork. These deaths are not anomalies, but symptoms of a deeper structural problem embedded in how South Korea functions. At the center of this system is an economy dominated by a small number of massive corporations. One company alone, Samsung, accounts for nearly one-fifth of the country's total economic output. Political power, employment security, and social status are deeply intertwined with these firms, creating a system controlled by a few rather than shared broadly across society. This concentration of power has coincided with a demographic collapse. To maintain a stable population, each woman would need to have an average of 2.1 children. In South Korea, that number has fallen to around 0.7. In 2020, for the first time in the country's history, deaths outnumbered births. Despite years of government campaigns encouraging marriage and childbirth, the population continues to shrink at an accelerating pace. Many policy responses have failed to address the underlying causes. Government initiatives have ranged from public advertising campaigns to proposals suggesting girls start school earlier to improve their marriage prospects. These efforts have done little to confront the deeper structural pressures shaping everyday life. South Korea has combined the most demanding elements of capitalism with rigid hierarchical traditions, producing a society defined by relentless competition, long hours, and material insecurity. To understand how the country reached this point, it is necessary to look back. South Korea's culture of pressure did not emerge overnight. In the early 20th century, the Korean peninsula was colonized by Japan and subjected to brutal rule for 35 years. Liberation in 1945 was followed almost immediately by division and war. The Korean War devastated the South, leaving it impoverished, unstable, and vulnerable. Faced with existential threats, South Korea pursued survival through rapid development. The government concluded that only aggressive economic growth could secure the nation's future. Education became the foundation of this strategy. Under the leadership of Park Chung-hee, schooling was elevated as the primary engine of national recovery and global competitiveness. This approach aligned with Confucian cultural values emphasizing hierarchy, discipline, and respect for authority. While these traditions exist across East Asia, South Korea applied them with unmatched intensity. Academic success became the primary measure of personal worth. What began as a strategy for rebuilding the nation gradually evolved into a national obsession. Over time, educational pressure spread downward. By the 2010s, intense competition had reached not only universities and high schools, but elementary schools and even kindergartens. By 2020, roughly one-quarter of South Korean students reported symptoms of depression. Among children aged 6 to 11, treatment for depression doubled in just 6 years. As education became the dominant path to social mobility, families invested enormous resources to secure advantages for their children. This fueled the growth of hagwons, private tutoring academies that now form a multi-billion-dollar industry. Access to these institutions depends largely on income, reinforcing inequality under the appearance of meritocracy. All of this pressure culminates in the Sunung, an 8-hour national exam that largely determines university placement and career prospects. Many exam questions extend beyond public school curricula, favoring students who attended elite private academies. For lower-income families, the system effectively limits opportunity before adulthood even begins. The ultimate goal for many students is admission to one of the elite SKY universities, Seoul National, Korea University, or Yonsei. These institutions serve as powerful gatekeepers. In 2010, nearly half of senior government officials and half of top financial executives were SKY graduates. Access to leadership roles remains closely tied to these schools. Despite the intense focus on education, the returns have diminished. Around 70% of South Koreans now attend university, the highest rate globally. Yet youth inactivity is also among the highest. Hundreds of thousands of young people neither work nor seek employment, even as many hold university degrees. This phenomenon has become known as the Sampo generation, those forced to abandon relationships, marriage, and children simply to survive economically. In earlier decades, sacrifice promised long-term stability. Hard work once translated into home ownership, family formation, and national progress. Today, that promise has eroded. Surveys show that most young South Koreans believe social mobility is largely determined by birth, not effort. Education no longer guarantees upward movement, yet remains socially mandatory. Financial returns reflect this shift. In most developed economies, university graduates earn substantially more than non-graduates. In South Korea, the wage premium is far smaller. Many graduates never recoup tuition costs, creating what economists describe as an education bubble driven by credential inflation rather than productivity. Housing has intensified these pressures, particularly in Seoul. Over half the population lives in the capital region, where top universities and corporate headquarters are concentrated. Strict development regulations and intense demand have driven housing prices beyond the reach of most young people. Economic opportunity has become geographically concentrated, while affordability collapses. These conditions directly shape fertility behavior. In urban environments, children represent high financial and opportunity costs. Long working hours, insecure employment, and housing barriers make family formation increasingly unrealistic. Traditional gender norms further complicate matters. Marriage remains closely linked to property ownership, creating a cycle in which marriage requires wealth, but wealth is harder to accumulate without marriage. Childbirth outside marriage remains heavily stigmatized. In 2022, only about 2% of births occurred outside wedlock, compared to an OECD average near 40%. Legal and social recognition of non-marital families remains limited, discouraging alternative family structures that could mitigate population decline. At the same time, South Korea's labor market is dominated by a small group of family-controlled conglomerates known as Chaebol. Companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG control a majority of market value, yet employ only a small fraction of the workforce. Employment within these firms offers security, prestige, and financial stability unmatched elsewhere. This dominance has reinforced rigid hierarchies and toxic workplace norms. South Korea consistently ranks among the worst OECD countries for work-life balance and gender equality. Hierarchical structures discourage dissent and accountability, a pattern illustrated by disasters linked to suppressed communication and regulatory capture. Political relationships between government and conglomerates further entrench these issues. Corporate leaders wield significant influence over policy, while scandals involving corruption and regulatory failure have repeatedly undermined public trust. Despite their economic importance, these firms have often operated with limited accountability. The cumulative result is structural stagnation. Innovation is constrained, small businesses struggle to compete, and labor markets remain inflexible. Productivity growth has slowed, inequality has risen, and social cohesion has weakened. These outcomes are not accidental, but deeply connected to the same systems that once powered rapid growth. South Korea's demographic crisis did not begin with contemporary cultural debates. Fertility rates began falling below replacement levels in the early 1980s and have declined steadily for decades. Recent political controversies have drawn attention to the country, but its challenges are long-standing and structural. What makes South Korea's situation unique is that its problems are inseparable from its successes. The institutions that delivered extraordinary growth now impose unsustainable social costs. Burnout, depression, and disengagement are increasingly common. Many young people struggle to imagine a future worth committing to. The central question is no longer whether South Korea can change. It is whether the country is willing to confront the foundations of its own success, and accept that the system which built prosperity may also be the one preventing its continuation.